He flew through the air with effortless magic. He battled dragons, dodged spells, and soared across Quidditch fields. Audiences saw Harry Potter fearless, untouchable. But behind those legendary scenes was a real man tethered to wires, crashing into walls, and taking every brutal fall so the magic could feel real. His name was David Holmes, and for the first 6 Harry Potter films, he was Daniel Radcliffe's stunt double, the one who made the boy who lived look like a hero. Until one rehearsal, one explosion, and one miscalculated flight ended everything he once knew. This isn't a story about movie glory. This is the tragic fate of David Holmes, the man behind the magic, who paid the price with his body and rebuilt his life in the shadows of the legend he helped create. Long before he became the silent force behind a cinematic legend, he was just a boy from Essex, nimble, energetic, and fearless. From the moment he could walk, he was flipping, leaping, and tumbling. Gymnastics wasn't just a hobby, it was his world, his heartbeat, his first brush with gravity-defying wonder. He didn't chase fame, he chased flight. His name was David Holmes, and by the age of 14, he had already earned a spot on Great Britain's national gymnastics squad. But his dreams didn't stop at the edge of the mat. He saw something else. A world where physical artistry met imagination, the world of stunt work, and he wanted in. By 17, David was already making waves in the British stunt community, catching the attention of producers and coordinators. When Warner Brothers launched production of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, they weren't just looking for a stunt double, they were looking for someone who could become Harry in flight, in fear, and in action. David was the perfect fit. Same size, same build, same electric energy. But what truly set him apart was his mindset. Calm, professional, precise. He wasn't reckless, he was responsible, and he carried that responsibility for nearly a decade, growing up behind Daniel Radcliffe, performing the unthinkable with quiet excellence. Behind the scenes, David and Daniel became more than colleagues. They became brothers. Radcliffe once said, "I used to pretend to be a stuntman." He was the real deal. And for every spell Harry Potter cast on screen, David Holmes was the one who made it look like magic. It was one of those scenes the audience would barely blink at a quick blast, a mid-air toss, a body flung backward by invisible force. For David, it was routine, just another day being the wizard behind the wizard. During the final chapter of the saga, by then, David Holmes had performed hundreds of stunts across 6 films: wire work, crashes, falls, aerial spins. He knew every movement, every safety cue, every breath before a take. On that day in January 2009, he was rehearsing a complex explosion effect in Leavesden Studios, just outside London. The stunt required him to be harnessed to a high-speed wire, then violently yanked backward, simulating a magical blast that would send Harry flying across the room. Everyone had run through it. Timing was crucial. Padding was in place. The rig had been tested. David clipped into the harness. He took a deep breath. And then came the countdown. 3, 2, 1, action. In a split second, the wire snapped him back. The force was powerful, faster and stronger than expected. Something felt off. Instead of landing safely on the crash mat, David was thrown off course and struck a hard surface. The sound wasn't loud, but to those nearby, it didn't sound like a normal rehearsal. The entire set froze. He lay there awake, conscious, but eerily still. His eyes were open, his expression calm, and yet, something had changed. He quietly whispered what no one on set wanted to hear. He couldn't feel part of his body. The stunt team rushed in. Medical professionals were called immediately. Everything stopped. In the world of action filmmaking, there's a term called the perfect sell. When a stunt looks so real, it takes your breath away. But this time, it wasn't a performance. It wasn't cinematic illusion. This was real. And for the first time in his career, David Holmes didn't stand back up. All stunts were performed by trained professionals under controlled conditions. Never attempt these actions in real life. There was no chaos, no screaming, just an eerie silence, the kind that settles over a room when something irreversible has happened. David lay flat on the studio floor, his body motionless, his mind alert. Crew members rushed toward him, but even before they reached his side, David spoke the words that no one wanted to hear. "I can't feel anything from my chest down." Medics were called immediately. The rehearsals stopped cold. The stunt team, seasoned as they were, stood frozen. They had all taken hits before. But this wasn't a bruise or a broken finger. This was something deeper, something final. David remained calm, composed. The same professionalism he carried into every stunt now guided him through the aftermath of the worst moment of his life. He didn't panic, he didn't cry, but his eyes, steady and knowing, said everything. Daniel Radcliffe wasn't on set that day, but when the news reached him, he was devastated. The entire Harry Potter cast and crew reeled in shock. For years, they had watched David fly, fall, and get up again. He had seemed untouchable, until he wasn't. The production halted that day, not just out of necessity, but out of respect. Everyone knew something had changed, not just in the studio, but in all of them. It wasn't until later, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, that the final diagnosis was confirmed: a severe spinal injury. The kind that leaves no second chances. David Holmes, the young man who made Harry Potter soar, would never walk again. In the hours that followed, reality sank in, not just for David, but for everyone who had ever worked beside him. He was transported to the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital in Stanmore, one of the top spinal injury units in the UK. The scans were definitive: a broken neck, damage to the cervical spine, and paralysis from the chest down. Word spread slowly, carefully. Warner Brothers kept public statements brief, and the media largely respected the family's privacy. But inside the studio walls, the impact was profound. Cast members were stunned, crew members cried, and Daniel Radcliffe, the boy David had protected, shadowed, and quite literally carried through a decade of action, was heartbroken. He visited David in the hospital frequently, not as an actor visiting a colleague, but as a friend, a brother, someone who had shared risks, laughs, and long shooting days in the shadow of a billion-dollar franchise. David, for his part, stayed remarkably composed. "I had an amazing life before the accident," he said later in interviews, "and I plan to have an amazing life after." His resilience was disarming. Even in a hospital bed, with his body unresponsive, he reassured others more than himself. But make no mistake, the loss was monumental. The Deathly Hallows shoot continued, but not without grief. The stunt department tightened every protocol. Wire pulls were recalibrated. Safety teams doubled efforts. What happened to David wasn't just a freak accident. It was a haunting reminder that even professionals, the best of them, are never immune. Behind every spectacular fall on screen is a real human body. And sometimes, that body breaks. David Holmes never returned to stunt work. His spinal cord injury had permanently paralyzed him from the chest down. For most people, that would have been the end of the story, a tragic closing chapter. But David refused to let that day define the rest of his life. Instead, he rewrote the narrative. He underwent months of grueling rehabilitation, not just to regain mobility, which doctors said he never would, but to rebuild purpose. He rechanneled his intensity, precision, and passion into something new: storytelling. David co-founded a production company and later became the subject of a deeply moving documentary. But he didn't stop there. He launched a podcast titled Cunning Stunts, where he interviewed fellow stunt performers, giving voice to a profession that too often went unheard. And in 2023, he collaborated with Daniel Radcliffe, the boy he once flew for, to tell his own story in the documentary David Holmes, The Boy Who Lived. The film was not about pity. It was about power, the power of perspective, of perseverance, of honoring what was lost by celebrating what remains. Meanwhile, the Harry Potter franchise continued to thrive. Billions in box office returns, theme parks, streaming deals, a legacy cemented in pop culture. But among those who knew the truth, David's story became a quiet cornerstone of that legacy. Daniel Radcliffe said it best: "David is an inspiration not because of what happened to him, but because of how he's chosen to respond to it." David Holmes may have lost the ability to walk, but he never lost the will to move forward. He didn't die that day, but something did. The man who had once defied gravity, danced through explosions, and made fantasy look effortless, now lived in a body that wouldn't obey him. Yet David Holmes never asked for sympathy. What he wanted, instead, was perspective, clarity, legacy. He had spent nearly a decade soaring through the world of Harry Potter, giving breath and bone to a cinematic icon, but the cameras never turned to him. His name appeared deep in the credits, if at all. And when the magic turned into pain, when the wires pulled too hard and fate intervened, the world kept spinning. Movies continued, audiences clapped. But David's world stood still, and then it moved again. Not through legs or feet, but through story, through advocacy, through every interview, every podcast episode, every young stunt performer he mentored from his wheelchair, through the documentary he helped create, through the quiet but unwavering friendship of Daniel Radcliffe, who never stopped showing up. David Holmes reminds us that not all heroes wear capes. Some wear harnesses. Some carry scars instead of wands. Some are remembered not for how high they flew, but for how they rose after the fall. The magic of cinema comes at a cost. And behind every breathtaking moment on screen, there are real people risking real pain for a shot that lasts 3 seconds. David's name may not be etched on the Harry Potter posters, but he will always be the one who made the boy fly. And when you re-watch those scenes, the soaring, the crashing, the triumph, remember that somewhere, far from the red carpets, lives a man who gave everything for those moments and still calls himself lucky. He lived, but the life he knew ended that day. If you believe stories like David's deserve to be seen, heard, and remembered, help us honor these invisible heroes. Like, share, and subscribe to The Last Stunt, because behind every fall, there's a story that still stands.